The food drive bustled with activity, noise, and chatter filling the air. But Tommy Walters wasn't paying attention to any of that. He dashed through the crowd, a worn grocery bag clutched in his hands. His anticipation was palpable as he approached the tables piled high with food. Each item was like a treasure to him. The meat stack of canned goods, fresh vegetables gleaming with moisture, and loaves of soft bread. Tommy had never seen so much food in one place. "Wow," he murmured in awe. "Look at all this food." He darted from one table to another, selecting items with careful consideration. Although he was only 9, lack had made him wiser than his years. There were lots of snacks and candy which he was tempted to pick, but he looked away and went for cans of soup, vegetables, bread, and fruits, because those were a better option for his family. With these, his mum could cook for almost a week. "That's enough," one of the volunteers said kindly, and Tommy stepped away from the line, his bag filled to the brim. As he walked away from the community centre and toward home, his steps were lighter. The weight of the bag didn't burden him like it should. Instead, it lifted his spirits. One thing was certain. Tonight, he would have the best dinner. He couldn't remember the last time he went to bed with a full stomach. As he stopped by the traffic light, he thought about how he almost missed today's food distribution. He lived far away from the community centre, and usually before he arrived, nearly all the food was gone. Today he'd arrived hours early, determined to get something good. His full bag was a testimony. The pedestrian lights turned green, and Tommy hurried across the road, eager to get home. As he crossed toward the curb, his gaze was snagged by the gleaming exterior of a sleek Mercedes that stopped at a light. It had a glossy sheen that drew Tommy's attention, and like a kid in a candy shop, he couldn't stop himself from touching it. He flicked the Mercedes emblem attached to the hood, and he gasped in wonder when it turned. He had hardly retracted his hand when a loud honk caused him to shriek in fear. The car zoomed forward and Tommy leaped onto the curb, barely avoiding being hit. To his shock, the car spun around and pulled over beside him. He stumbled back as the driver's door swung open and a tall man stepped out, his face marred in an ugly scowl. "Are you stupid?" the man growled, and Tommy gasped at the hate in the man's eyes. "Why did you touch my car, you worthless piece of shit?" I'm sorry, sir." Tommy shook, intimidated by the angry adult bearing down on him. "What if you had scratched my car?" the man yelled. "Even if I sold your entire family, they wouldn't amount to half the worth of my car." Despite his fear, Tommy felt a flare of anger. He was very protective of his family. "Please, sir, don't say that. I'm sorry, The man hit him across the face, cutting him off. The grocery bag fell from his hands and some of the food spilled to the ground. "You rely on the government's assistance for food," the man said, staring at the food items spilled onto the curb. "And you dare to touch a brand new Mercedes?" He stomped on the bread, flattening it beneath the heel of his shoe. Tommy burst into tears, overwhelmed and hurt. He was really looking forward to eating that bread. "Yes, cry," the man taunted. "Let this serve as a lesson to you until you die, because you would never be able to afford a car like this." "That's enough!" A bold voice cut through the exchange. Through the haze of tears, Tommy saw an old lady coming towards them. The angry man turned his vitriol on the woman. "Mind your business, old hag." "You're being a bully," the lady responded, undaunted by the man's insults. "Leave the little boy alone." The angry man scoffed and kicked the bread onto the road. "Go fetch," he said. "That will probably be your last meal in a long time." As he turned to go back to his car, he eyed the old lady with disgust. "These paupers never mind their business," he grumbled, sliding back into the driver's seat and pulling off. Tommy wiped his tears and quickly gathered the rest of the food into his grocery bag. "Thank you, ma'am," he said to the old woman. "Ignore everything he said," the lady said, smiling gently. "People like him are unhappy and always want to take it out on others." Tommy nodded and continued towards home, struggling not to burst into tears again. It wasn't the slap that hurt. As a kid who grew up in the projects, He was used to rough handling and had developed a tough skin. What broke his heart were the words the man said to him. "Let this serve as a lesson to you until you die, because you would never be able to afford a car like this. Even if I sold your entire family, they wouldn't amount to half the worth of my car." "You worthless piece of shit!" Tommy had no money. The only thing he had was hope. And with those few words, the man had shattered his hopes into tiny pieces that he might never be able to piece back. Could he make it out of here? Would he truly never be able to buy a car that expensive? Of all the vehicles on the road, the Mercedes shone the brightest. Would he ever be able to afford a car like that? As he neared their old makeshift trailer home, Tommy saw his parents sitting outside. In the late evenings like this, it was usually too hot to stay inside, so they all waited outside until the trailer's temperature cooled. His parents hadn't seen him yet, so Tommy took the time to school his expression into normalcy, so his parents wouldn't suspect a thing. Even if they did, what could they do? His father was wheelchair-bound and had been for years. Aside from being a wheelchair user, his speech was slurred due to the extreme nature of the injury that put him in this position. "Tommy," his mother called excitedly when he neared them. "Oh, my son, look at all that food." Tommy couldn't meet his mother's eyes. He handed her the bag and started to go into the house. "Tommy?" She touched his shoulder. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." He climbed the small step that led through the front door. "It's hot outside," she called, but Tommy shut the door and trudged through the house to the living room. He didn't even have the privacy of a bedroom to nurse his pride because the trailer was so small. As soon as he sank into one of the rickety chairs in the corner, his mother came inside. "It's so hot here," she grumbled, coming to sit on the table before him. "Tommy, what's wrong?" "Nothing." "Did someone push you out of the line at the food drive like the other day?" She checked his body for signs of injury but found nothing amiss. "Tommy?" The trailer was truly hot, and beads of sweat were starting to roll down the sides of his mother's face. Tommy wished he could tell her what happened, but he didn't want to admit to anyone else that a strange man had slapped him and made him feel worthless. She pulled him close in an affectionate hug that communicated her love for him, and Tommy bit back another fresh round of tears. "You know I'm always here for you," she kissed his cheek. "You can always talk to me." Tommy nodded but didn't speak. His mum smiled. "And I want to thank you for the food, Tommy. You did well." Josh Walters waited impatiently for his wife, Sarah, to return so he could know what happened to Tommy. He wished he could go into the house and talk to his son, but he was bound to this chair and couldn't go anywhere without assistance. The trailer's front door opened, and his wife appeared with a grim look on her face. "What did Tommy say?" he asked, his words slurring and blending so the words sounded like a single elongated phrase. But he's had the accident for almost 5 years now. His wife and son had learned to decipher his words and understand him. His wife shook her head. "He won't speak," she said, and went about making dinner. As Sarah concentrated on the vegetables before her, Josh fought back tears. For an onlooker, his tears might seem extreme, but to him, it wasn't. It stemmed from his inability to protect his son like a father should. So many times Tommy would come home hiding a limp in his steps or covering up a bust lip. Due to his inability to provide for his family, they lived in this makeshift trailer. Josh knew how dangerous it is to live here and the violence children are subjected to from older adults seeking to assert dominance. But how could he protect his son when he couldn't even protect himself? He could hardly speak without his words slurring together, and movement was also restricted. There was only so much Sarah could do as a woman, and the lack of protection opened up their boy to many attacks. His throat constricted with emotion and he swallowed hard. There was no need to cry because it could never change his situation, yet he wished he could do something to protect his son. It was sweltering in the house, but Tommy didn't want to go outside because he wasn't over what happened yet. His cheek still stung, but his heart hurt more. He didn't have any ill intentions toward the car. He just touched it because it was shiny and beautiful. Why did the man react so extremely? Was it because he looked poor? He wasn't always this way. Years ago, his life was different. They didn't always live in this poor trailer house. He and his parents lived in a typical apartment in a comfortable middle-class neighborhood. It was possible because his father owned a construction company that built and renovated houses. It was a small business, so he worked alongside his employees, but it put food on their table and gave them a comfortable life. His father also had a truck, with which he would take Tommy and his mother on picnics every weekend. Tommy smiled, remembering how he would sit in his father's lap during drives, looking out the huge windscreen, waiting for the day he would be old enough to be behind the wheel. Until one day. Tommy remembered this day very clearly. He had just returned from school when his mother got a phone call. He didn't hear what the caller said, but his mother's expression changed, and she dropped him off at the neighbor's house before disappearing. The next time Tommy saw his father, he was in a wheelchair. He later learned that his father fell from a scaffold, hurting his spine and injuring his head. It took a long while for Tommy to reconcile his vibrant father, who had total control over the gigantic truck, to the one who couldn't get up from his chair without help. His father, who had a booming voice that resonated around the house, became a man who couldn't string words together without slurring. But those weren't the only changes Tommy experienced. After his father's unfortunate accident, life came at them very fast. With nobody to manage the company well, the workers left, and the money slowly drained. Father had taken a loan from the bank, which he had no problem paying before, but with no business and no money, it became a huge problem. After defaulting for a few months, the bank took everything they had, the house and the lovely truck. That was how they ended up in this trailer. After moving to this neighborhood, he had to change schools. The public school he attended here was an absolute slum, and Tommy hated it. Not only was it rowdy and disorderly, the kids bullied him. They made jest of him for having a disabled father and for living in a trailer. It was insane how other poor kids laughed at him because he was poorer than them. Sometimes they would beat him up and say, "Go tell your dad. Let's see what he's going to do about it." At first, Tommy resented his dad for not being able to protect him, but he'd come to realize that it wasn't his father's fault. Now he didn't talk to anyone at school and would rather be alone, drawing. It was the one thing he and his father had in common. Before the accident, his father used to draw building plans before he would go on site. Tommy loved looking at those plans and recreating them. It had been years since his father drew anything, but Tommy didn't stop drawing. He had several drawing books where he sketched different building plans and other exciting things. He never showed this to anyone, not to his father and certainly not to his mother, who was always overworked, caring after her husband and trying to pay their bills. He wished things were different. Sometimes he wondered where he would be if it weren't for that accident. Right now, it seemed like nothing was going well for him, and it was hard not to hold on to what the car owner said. "Let this serve as a lesson to you until you die, because you would never be able to afford a car like this." Tommy sucked in a breath and released it shakily as he rose to his feet. No, the only thing he had was hope, and he wouldn't let that wicked man take it from him. "I will make it out of here," he said, "and I will buy a car just like that. You'll see." "Tommy, if we don't leave now, we're going to be late," Sarah Walters shouted as she waited for her son outside the trailer. Moments later, Tommy stepped out of the house. He was a tall, scrawny kid with a gangly appearance and brown hair that always looked tousled. "I combed my hair, if that's what you want to complain about," he grumbled, and Sarah rolled her eyes, reaching out to comb her hand through his hair and smoothen it back. He ducked. "Mom, you know you don't have to go to the food drive with me," he said. "I'm a big boy. I can do it myself." And that was the problem. Sarah didn't want him to be a big boy. She wanted him to be her little boy. He still had enough time until he was an adult. She was tired of him carrying so many responsibilities, forgetting he was still a kid. Tommy was the best child any parent could ask for. Since his father's accident, he had never complained or cried about anything. He didn't ask for stuff nor grumbled when they had to go to sleep with empty stomachs. He would stay home and help her with house chores instead of going out to play with the other kids. Sarah had tried to get him to ease up many times, but nothing worked. He wanted to help as much as he could, and Sarah feared it was robbing him of his childhood. For instance, Tommy took it upon himself to always go to the food drive to source as many food items as he could every month. He would leave home hours before the event started so he could be one of the firsts in line and would fill up the bag, not minding that it would be too heavy for his long walk home. Since this particular chore made him content, Sarah let him have it until last month, when he'd come home with a dried streak of tears on his face. She still remembered the hurt and heartbreak in his eyes as he sat in the living room, and no matter how many times she asked what happened, he wouldn't say. The month before, a bigger kid pushed him out of the line so hard he scraped his hands and knees. The Walters family might not have much, but Sarah would not sit back and let her son be bullied because of food. So from now on, she would either accompany him to the food drive or miss it. He wasn't going there alone anymore. "Mum, if we walk any slower, we'll get there when the event is over," Tommy groaned, taking her hand and urging her to walk faster. Sarah laughed. "We are 2 hours early. I don't think we'd be missing out on anything." When they arrived at the community centre, only a few people were in the queue. Sarah nudged Tommy playfully as they joined the line. "You see? Mama knows best." Tommy laughed. "I hope they have bread. It's been years since I had any." Let's see. After half an hour of standing, Sarah had to use the bathroom. She touched Tommy's shoulder. "I have to use the bathroom." "Will you be okay?" Tommy groaned. "Mum, I'm not a baby. I'll be fine. Take as much time as you need." Sarah hurried towards the row of restrooms in the back of the centre and quickly relieved herself. The next moment, she washed her hands and rushed back to the queue before anyone tried to bully Tommy again. Her brows rose in confusion when she approached the queue and saw an elderly lady talking to Tommy. It didn't look like a bullying situation, but it made her uncomfortable because she didn't know the lady. "Excuse me." She reached Tommy and pulled him protectively to her side, although she smiled politely. "This is my son. Is there a problem?" The smile on the older woman's face widened as she stared up at Sarah. "It's so nice to meet you, Sarah. I'm Marge. I recognized your son from afar and wanted to ask how he was doing." "Recognized him from where?" "It's nothing, Mum," Tommy answered. Marge looked at Tommy for a brief second. "You didn't tell your mother what happened that day?" "What happened?" Sarah asked curiously, and Marge told her all about how a man bullied and hit Tommy because he briefly touched his car. By the time the recount ended, Sarah was shaking with anger. "Thank you for standing up for my son, Marge." "Joe," Sarah said. "That was so kind." Marge waved off her appreciation with a chuckle. "Your son stood up for himself. He was very brave. Good job raising him." Sarah smiled and asked the question burning in her mind. "Do you know the man, or have any idea where I can find him?" Marge frowned. "I know where you can find him, but I'll advise you to stay away from the likes of him." Sarah nodded. "Please tell me where I can find him." Marge sighed. "He owns the metal shop on 10th Street. I can't remember the name, but you can miss it." "I appreciate you, ma'am." "Remember my advice," Marge said kindly. "Goodbye, Tommy. I'm sure we'll meet again." When the elderly lady left, Tommy looked at her with a soft smile. "Mum," he called. "It's okay. I'm okay." Sarah nodded, but his soft smile only strengthened her resolve to visit the car owner. She remembered the hurt in Tommy's eyes that day, and the pain she felt was almost unbearable. How could she sit back and let someone hurt her child like that? No, she would make that man pay. The next day, when Tommy was in school and her husband was asleep, Sarah left home. She didn't know what she planned to do to the man yet, but she would make sure that he knew he was wrong for bullying a little boy. Quickly, she made her way to 10th Avenue, and soon she stood in front of a giant metal shop. When Sarah saw the name engraved on the wall, she gasped as memories came crashing back. Holland Metal Shop. Way before Josh started his construction company, he used to work here. She remembered it clearly because Josh would complain about his boss. Mr. Holland, all the time. Eventually, Holland fired her husband because he claimed Josh was starting to know more about the business than him, which posed a threat. Not only did he fire Josh unjustly and without prior warning, but he also refused to give him his last paycheck. It was after this disappointment that Josh started his construction company. As the memories flitted through Sarah's head, she looked around the premises and saw the car precisely as Marge described it. A Mercedes-Benz, shiny and sleek. She also wanted to touch it, but not as Tommy did. Tommy touched it with awe and interest. She wanted to destroy it in revenge. As she looked at the sleek, smooth exterior that gleamed underneath the harsh sun rays, Sarah imagined scratching the vehicle and tainting its beauty. Oh, that would give her immense satisfaction. She stepped towards the car and a voice rang through her head, causing her to stop. "I'll advise you to stay away from the likes of him." "Mum, it's okay, I'm okay." The voice of Marge and her son warred in her head, and Sarah struggled with enacting revenge or doing the right thing. As upset as she was, the right thing would be to walk away, and that's what she did. It was the hardest thing she'd ever done, but Sarah turned away from the car and walked out of the company. She took the long route home to calm her nerves and ease her anger. She was a few minutes from home when she saw a familiar face across the street. It was Marge. She was carrying a few bags and looking very lost. Sarah crossed to her. "Hey, Marge." The old lady turned and a smile crossed her face. "Sarah, it's lovely to see you again." "Likewise, where are you off to?" Sarah nodded at the bags. "Oh, nowhere," Marge laughed. "I'm just returning from the local shelter. There are no more beds for tonight." "Oh no," Sarah's heart fell. "What are your alternatives?" Marge shrugged. "I'll just wander around a bit until evening. I'm sure I'll find a spot to lay my head." "What?" Sarah shrieked. "Why don't you come over to our place? It's nothing much, but you can lay your head for the night." Marge shook her head. No, I'm fine." "Please, Marge." "No, really." Marge shook her head firmly and started to walk away. Sarah wouldn't take no for an answer. She chased after Marge and grabbed one of her bags. "I insist, please." Marge looked undecided. "I don't want to be a bother. I'll sort myself out, Sarah." "No, let me help. Come with me, just for tonight," Sarah said, and led her towards the house. By the time they arrived home, Josh was already awake. When Sarah introduced Marge to him and told him about how Marge stood up for Tommy when he had trouble with the car owner, Josh welcomed her with open arms. When Tommy returned, he was surprised to see Marge, but when Sarah explained the situation, he went out of his way to ensure she was comfortable. Later that night, they had a fantastic dinner, courtesy of the food items they got from yesterday's food drive. After their meal, while Sarah was in their room trying to help Josh get comfortable in bed, she listened to Tommy and Marge's conversation in the living room. The walls were very flimsy, so it wasn't hard to hear them at all. "How come you don't have a place to live?" Tommy asked Marge. Sarah would have called him out on asking such a private question, but she was also curious to know. Marge seemed like a very educated, sophisticated lady. Sarah was shocked to learn she was homeless. "Life is such a funny movie, Tommy," Marge answered with a wistful laugh. "One minute you have a family and are happy, the next you're bedridden for almost 2 years, with a pile of medical bills that your insufficient insurance cannot cover." Sarah's heart constricted with pain. She related to Marge's ordeal. One minute they were living a comfortable life, and the next she was taking care of a wheelchair-bound husband and bearing the family's financial burden alone. "I don't understand," Tommy said. "Is that what happened to you?" "Yes. I used to be married. But one day, we got into an accident, and things went downhill for me. I lost everything. I am not giving you all the details because you're still young. I don't want you carrying all that baggage around." Sarah smiled at the woman's consideration, but Tommy wasn't having it. "I'm a big boy," he argued. "The same thing happened to us too. After my dad's accident, we became poor. I thought only my family suffered like that." Marge laughed. "Misfortune can befall anyone, Tommy, and so can success. You've experienced misfortune. You must work hard to be successful, Tommy sighed. I've not heard of anyone from this place becoming successful, yes. You're a brilliant boy, Tommy. If anyone can do it, it's you, Marge said. Right there and then, Sarah decided that Marge was staying with them. She loved Marge's positivity and wanted Tommy to be surrounded by it. After all, Marge had nowhere to go. Josh? She touched her husband, who was already falling asleep. His eyes drifted open and rested on her. It had been so long since Sarah saw any spark in those eyes. She knew her husband was depressed, but she didn't know how to help because she wasn't in a suitable mental space either. Can Marge stay? She whispered. She has nowhere to go. Stay permanently? Yes. Josh thought about it for a moment. Can you manage? He asked. It's a small house. We will manage, she answered, and that was all Josh needed to hear. He nodded his agreement and went back to sleep. The following day, as the first light of dawn spilled through the windows, Marge picked up her bags, ready to leave. Sarah knew she had to approach the situation cautiously because she already knew Marge was just a woman who didn't want to bother anyone. Thank you for letting me stay the night, Sarah, Marge said. I will never forget this. Sarah smiled. So where are you headed now? The bus station, Marge said like it was natural. I'll stay there until evening and hope there are free beds at the shelter. That's not feasible, is it? Sarah asked. Why don't you stay until something clears up for you? Marge started to shake her head. Oh no, that will be an inconvenience. I don't know when something will clear up. I've been on the street for over a year now. That's fine. We can all manage, Sarah nodded. No, please, you've done enough, Marge said. I don't want to be a bother. Please stay. They both turned to see Tommy standing a few feet away, still drowsy from sleep. You don't have to go, he said. Stay with us. Tommy. Tears shone in Marge's eyes. That's so sweet of you. You see, Sarah nudged. You won't be bothering anyone. My husband wants you to stay too. After a few moments of silence, Marge hugged Sarah and Tommy. Thank you. You have no idea how grateful I am. Tommy sat on the bench outside the trailer, deeply engrossed in his drawing. His tongue peeked out the corner of his mouth, his fingers slowly glossing over the page as he drew confidently. Moments like this were when he felt the happiest. Tommy? Marge rounded the corner and began walking towards him, but Tommy was too immersed in his drawing to notice her. Tommy? She was only a few feet away now, and close enough to jolt Tommy out of his concentration. His head snapped up, and when he saw Marge, he tried to shove his drawing paper beneath the stack of books on the bench. I was doing my homework, he said uneasily. No, you weren't, Marge said kindly. Let me see what you were drawing. Tommy shifted in his seat. Marge had been living with them for 4 months, and he loved her very much, but he didn't think he was ready to show her his drawings. Since he started recreating his father's building plans and sketches, he'd never shown anyone. It's okay, Tommy. You can trust me with them. Bravely, Tommy handed Marge the drawing paper. The woman gasped, her eyes widening as she took in the diagram. Hold on. Is this what you were drawing? You drew this yourself? Yes. What? She shrieked. This is incredible, Tommy. His cheeks grew red, and he lowered his head. I don't know. This is a concrete building plan, she said, sitting beside him. Where did you learn to draw these? Tommy looked up at her, reveling in the admiration he saw in her eyes. He didn't know his drawings were that good. He thought they were knockoffs of his dad's old plans. From my dad. He taught you? No, I taught myself using his old plans. He used to work in construction. Oh, yes. She nodded, staring at the diagram again. Your mother mentioned he used to build houses. I didn't know he also drew building plans. He did. He'd show me the plans he drew on paper, and then we'd go see the building when he finished. It was amazing how he could draw something on paper and turn it into a real building. It felt like magic. Marge stared at him for a long time, noticing how he became animated, talking about his drawing. He was usually a quiet child. Which part did you love? She asked. Drawing or construction? Drawing, Tommy said. I think construction is dangerous. Look at my dad. Accidents don't always happen, kiddo, Marge said. And with all the heightened security measures in place, the likelihood of it happening is slim. Tommy thought about Marge's words. Yes, he loved seeing the building on paper become an actuality, but he felt real joy by looking at the diagram on paper. And by the time he learned to draw those buildings by himself, it became an escape from the harsh reality that was his life. On days when he had a terrible day at school like today, or when they would go to bed hungry, all he had to do was draw, and he'd feel okay. It gave him life. I love drawing more, he said to Marge. Do you know what that is called? Art? Marge shook her head. It's called architecture, she said. You see this right here. She held up the paper like it was a trophy. Tommy, you're only 9 years old. I'll be 10 next month, he promptly reminded her. Marge laughed and corrected herself. How could I forget? You're almost 10 years old. And you drew this? I don't know many adult architects with fancy degrees that can sketch a layout plan with this level of precision. Surely she must be flattering him, Tommy thought. Really? Are you serious? Yes. But how do you know? Marge smiled and rose from the bench. Come, let me show you something. Tommy eagerly followed Marge into the trailer. She reached for one of her bags that she always kept at the back of the big old couch in the living room. Tommy waited patiently as she dug through the bag and took out a file. He gasped when she showed him different sketches of building plans. Are these yours? Yes. His eyes widened. You do architecture? I'm an architect, yes, Marge laughed. Can I be that too? Tommy asked hopefully. Son, with your drawings, it won't take much until you're a badass. Tommy laughed, his blood pumping in excitement. He felt like he was talking to a kindred spirit. Right now, your drawings are highly imaginative and functional. They only lack technical precision and professional architectural standards. How do I get those? School. His brows shot up. He wasn't a big fan of school, especially the public school he currently went to. But they don't teach me to draw like this in school. You will learn that in college, Marge said. And to get to college, you must successfully get through elementary and high school. Tommy sighed. But the classrooms are really noisy and it's hard to focus. I'm not. Hey! Marge grabbed his shoulders gently. I know. I went to a public school too. Really? Yes, you must work a little harder to shut out all the distractions and focus on the teachers, okay? Where's your mum right now? She's at work. Correct, Marge nodded. She used to work 2 jobs, but since I offered to look after you, she's taken up 1 more. Juggling 3 jobs is hard and demanding. I know. Tommy's stomach dropped. He'd been seeing his mother less and less these days. Sometimes all he remembered was a kiss on his cheek while he slept, and by morning, she'd be gone. And there's your dad. Marge lowered her voice because his father was in the other room and the walls were flimsy. He did everything he could for you while he had the means, but now there's only little he can do, and I'm sure it hurts him every day. Tommy swallowed. Sometimes, when Marge went on a stroll and Tommy was in the back drawing, he would hear his father sobbing in his room because he thought the house was empty. Tommy wished he could comfort him, but he knew his father waited until the house was silent because he didn't want anyone to see him that way. He couldn't remember the last time he saw his father happy. Promise me you're going to ignore the distractions and focus on studying, Marge asked. Marge might not know it, but the distractions weren't only a noisy class. There was also physical and verbal bullying from his classmates, not to mention the regular bouts of hunger. But as Tommy thought about the circumstances surrounding his life at the moment, he knew education was his only way out. He wasn't going to let anything stop him. I promise, he said, strengthening his heart and resolve. He could do this. I don't know how long I'll be here for, Marge said, but I'm going to help you. Now go out there and do your homework. I promised your mum to always make sure your homework is done. 8 years later, Tommy sat on the bench in the backyard, the unopened envelope held tightly in his hands. As a kid, this was his favourite spot to draw. As he grew older, it became his best spot just to be. It's only befitting that he opened the envelope here. His hands trembled as he raised the envelope and stared at the official letterhead of the prestigious university he had applied to. His heart was racing with anxiety, and he battled feelings of imposter syndrome. What gave him the audacity to apply to a reputable university with a 4% admission rate? Why did he, a boy who went to a public school with classrooms so noisy you could barely hear the teacher speak, think he stood a chance to compete with rich, posh kids who went to expensive private schools, kids who had access to the finest tutors and parents with valid, high-profile connections? He should never have applied to this school. Scared, he dumped the letter on the bench beside him and dropped his head into his hands. He didn't get in. He knew it. Tommy. He looked up through a haze of anxious tears to see his family standing around the corner. Mom had her hands around the handle of Dad's wheelchair, and Aunt Marge stood beside them. They all had proud looks on their faces. "I've not opened it," he said, nodding at the sealed envelope on the bench. "We know," Mom said. Why did they look so proud then? "We are here to show support," Marge said. "Thank you." "And to tell you that we are proud of you," Mum added, with Dad nodding in agreement. "No matter what the letter says." "Thank you." Tommy breathed out a sigh and picked up the letter again. This time, before he overthought again, he pried the envelope open, his fingers shaking as he unfolded the letter. All his hard work through school was hinged on this single moment. He's never had a win in his life. He needed this one. His eyes scanned the text with anxiety, but his world tilted on its axis when he read the words, "Congratulations, you have been admitted." "What does it say?" Mom asked impatiently. Tommy couldn't respond immediately. He had lived such a struggling life that he had never felt this much happiness all at once, and it was hard for him to process it. The admission letter was snatched from his hand, and he looked up to see his mother and Marge reading. "Dad!" He hurried to his father, who couldn't move from his position. "I got in. I got the scholarship too." His mother and Marge whooped with joy from behind him as his father broke into a tearful smile. "I'm so proud of you, son. I knew you would get it." The next few moments were of joyful celebration as they all congratulated him on his admission. "This calls for an amazing dinner," his mom said. Tommy rolled his eyes. "Mom, let's not get too excited and forget our reality. We have barely enough to eat tonight." His mother laughed. "I have some money saved," she said. "It's not much, but it should be enough to make you chicken pasta just as you like it." Tommy flung his arms around his mother's neck and kissed her cheek. "Thank you, Mom." "You're welcome." She turned to his dad. "Honey, would you like Tommy to take you on a stroll while Marge and I start lunch?" "Sure," Dad nodded. "If Tommy doesn't mind." "I don't." Tommy grabbed his wheelchair, excitement still coursing through his bones. "I know your favourite spot." Sarah could hardly control her tears long enough for her husband and son to disappear. As soon as they were gone, she crumpled onto the bench and burst into the most heart-wrenching sob. "Sarah, it's okay." Marge chuckles, gently rubbing her shoulders, mistaking Sarah's tears for joy. "We're all happy about this. Tommy has done us proud." "Marge," Sarah cried, looking up at the woman who has grown into a sister in the years they've lived together. "How can I afford this?" she asked. "How?" Finally understanding Sarah's tears, Marge sat beside her. "Sarah, he won a scholarship," she said. "He's covered." "For tuition only," Sarah sobbed. "I'm grateful that his tuition has been covered, but what about everything else, Marge? What about books and supplies? I know he'd need them. What about living expenses, pocket money, other miscellaneous costs?" Marge hung her head, the weight of the situation finally dawning on her. Sarah continued to cry bitterly. "I'm already working 3 jobs and use my maximum working hours at each one, and yet after we pay the rent for this stupid trailer, there's almost nothing left. Public school is different from a private university." "You're right," Marge nodded. "All your concerns are valid." I don't know what to do. I've thought about getting a fourth job, but... No, Marge shook her head. I'll get a job instead. What? I'll get a job. I'll get two if I have to. I don't care. We must do all we can for Tommy. Sarah stared at Marge in confusion. Are you serious? You'll do that for my son? Why not? I don't understand. For 10 years you've done everything to help him. You went through his homework and studied with him for his exams. You even helped him put the admission project work together. I get why. Sarah, Marge smiled, you all are my family. I don't count everything I'm doing because I'm doing it all from the depths of my heart. Oh, Marge. Sarah threw her arms around the woman and she wept harder. At 70 years old, there was only so little Marge could do, but Sarah appreciated the offer. She remembered how 10 years ago she'd seen Marge standing at the bus stop and quickly decided to bring her into their home. It wasn't convenient because they lived in a small trailer, and it was a struggle even to feed a family of 3, not to mention bring one more person in. But the decision had come from somewhere deep within, and it came with immense peace. Sarah knew she was doing the right thing. Now she could see how much of a blessing they would have missed if she had let Marge walk away. She may not bring money into the family, but her influence, especially on Tommy, was worth more than gold. Tommy was here today mainly because of her, and she would forever be grateful to Marge. The architecture studio was bustling and full of activity. Other students huddled over their drafting table with advanced digital gadgets, their latest projects displayed on high-end resolution screens and state-of-the-art tablets. Professor Williams, known for his relentless standards and keen eye, stood on the stage at the front of the room, holding a stack of sketches and blueprints. So who can explain the implications of using cantilevered structures in this particular design scenario? The professor asked, his voice carrying a tone of challenge. Tommy felt a burst of nervous energy as he coyly looked around the room. He's surprised that no one was answering. Cantilever designs were one of the first things Aunt Marge taught him during their lessons while he was in high school. Professor, that isn't in our syllabus, someone answered. I'm not sure anyone knows the answer to this. With a burst of courage, Tommy raised his hand, surprising everyone in class. Someone scoffed and laughed behind him. As if he could understand the stuff. Look how outdated his setup is. Tommy knew his setup was outdated, and his drafting tools were simple, but these things didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. What mattered was what you could do with them, and Tommy was confident in the magic he could create with such simple tools. He ignored the mockery and turned to the professor, who motioned for him to come to the front of the class. He walked to the whiteboard and, with a steadying breath, began to explain the cantilevered structure, his hand moving across the board as he described its principles. When he finished his illustrations, Professor Williams nodded with evident respect and approval. What's your name again? Tommy, he answered. Tommy Walters. Tommy, the professor nodded. You know your mate was right. This isn't in your syllabus for the semester. I was testing the limits of your knowledge, but you've blown me away. How did you get this? Tommy smiled. Let's just say I've had enough time to study ahead. Good, good. The professor nodded. You're on to great things, Mr. Tommy Walters. The grand hall was filled with an air of anticipation and excitement as the graduation ceremony reached its peak. The stage was designed with rows of banners and floral arrangements, while rows of elegantly dressed graduating students filled the seats, with her faces a mixture of relief, pride, and nervousness. Tommy sat amongst them, self-conscious in his cheap suit and worn shoes. His parents had managed to scrape some money together so he could afford the suit, and although it wasn't as luxurious as the other kids, Tommy was grateful he could even afford to wear one. As the names of each graduating student were called, the room buzzed with cheers and applause. Each student walked across the stage to collect their diploma, smiles and pride on their faces. Tommy knew he had tried his best, but he still sat nervously, hoping his best was enough. Finally, Professor Williams walked onto the stage and took the microphone. The room quieted, and all eyes focused on him. "Today," he said, his voice amplified by the microphone, "we honor the outstanding achievements of our students. Each of you has shown great commitment and talent. However, one student's performance has set an exemplary standard for all of us." A wave of curiosity swept through the crowd, and Tommy grabbed the edge of his seat. The last time he felt this anxious was when he got his admission envelope almost 5 years ago. He knew he had given his best in college, but so did many others. Others who went to the best elementary and high schools. "This year's award for the best graduating student in the class goes to Tommy Walters," Professor Williams boomed with warmth and authority. Tommy's heart leaped, his heart thudding with shock and delight. He remained frozen in his seat until applause rented the room, and the graduating student sitting close to him playfully pushed him up. As he walked to the stage, an impoverished ghetto kid amid the elites, tears stung his eyes. Today was a dream he'd had as a child, a dream he put in a glass and stared at all day long, wondering if it was possible. As he climbed onto the stage and shook Professor Williams' hand, Tommy suddenly felt all the possibilities. This was real. "Congratulations, Tommy," the professor said, handing him the sleek plaque engraved with the words, "Best Graduating Student." As Tommy accepted the award, the applause continued. He could see his professors clapping, their faces beaming with admiration. Everyone stared with pride, but the tears finally sprang free when Tommy didn't see the faces of those who meant the most to him. He clung to the award, crying into the microphone, wishing his family was here to see what he had become. His mom worked 4 jobs to support his schooling. His father also had to get a job at a local poultry farm just to pitch in. Even Aunt Marge tried to get a job, but she was too old, and no one would employ her. These people, his professors, his colleagues, everyone present in the room, they didn't know how far he'd come. They didn't know how much of a miracle this was. They probably thought he was just an intelligent kid who got awarded for his work. No one here knew how the odds were stacked against him or how everything around him was hell-bent on keeping him in the trailer. He was glad to be her and wished his family was here to celebrate with him. "It's okay, Tommy. You deserve this." Professor Williams hugged him. Tommy nodded and was about to step away from the podium when he saw a lone figure standing at the back while everyone else was seated. Even from a distance, he could tell her dress was old and frayed, but she managed to clean up very nicely. Their gazes met, and he could tell how hard her shoulders shook from sobbing. It was his dear mother, the one woman who had supported him through every challenge and sacrifice. Everything else faded into oblivion, and joy replaced the tears. He raised his hand and gestured towards her, a silent plea that she joined him on stage. Everyone's head craned to see who he was gesturing to, and laughter bubbled out of him. "That's my mother," he said. "Please permit her to join me on stage. Without her, I wouldn't be here today." "Sure," Professor Williams nodded. "Please, Mrs. Walters." His mother made her way to the stage, her steps slow and unsure. His hero. When she climbed onto the podium, Tommy embraced her tightly. They stood there holding each other and openly crying out. The weight of their journey and struggle crystallized in this raw, heartfelt moment. Finally, Tommy pulled away, took a deep breath, and took the microphone. "I'm sorry I'm crying so much," he said. "To all of you, it's just an award. To me, it is a crowning of my efforts over the years, the struggles and midnight tears. I dedicate this award to my mother. It's as much her achievement as mine." He handed the award to his mother, and her face flushed with pride. Soon they left the stage, accompanied by cheers and a standing ovation. The rest of the event breezed past and soon came to a close. Tommy reunited with his mother in the back and bombarded her with questions. "How did you get here?" he asked. "You said no one would be able to make it." "I almost didn't," his mother smiled, her face streaked with dry tears. "But as the ceremony drew nearer, we knew someone had to be here, so we pooled resources together." It was tight, but I made it. I'm so glad you made it, Mom. I was so happy to see you. Tears gathered in her eyes again, and she stroked his cheek. I am glad I came too. I couldn't imagine missing this ceremony. Tommy, mother and son turned to see Professor Williams standing a few feet away. Sir, Tommy smiled and officially introduced his mother to the man who had been his trusted mentor over the years. It's so nice to meet you, Mrs. Walters, Professor Williams said. Your son is a great man, and I'm privileged to be a part of his life. Thank you so much. May I steal him away for a few seconds? Sure. His mother nodded, and Tommy followed Professor Williams to the other end of the room. Is everything all right, sir? Tommy asked. Sure. The man smiled. You know, I've worked in this university as a professor for 15 years, and I've met many bright students, but never been this impressed with one. A smile rented Tommy's face. That is why I have also done something for you that I have never done for any student in my history here. Tommy frowned. What is that, sir? I'm sure you know of Archibald Architectural Firm? Yes, Tommy nodded. It was the most prominent architectural firm in the country, and every graduating student hoped to work there, but they were very exclusive. I have some connections there, and I've put in a good word for you, Professor Williams said. I don't give recommendations lightly, but when they asked me, I put your name forward without hesitation. I am very confident in your skills. He leaned forward with a conspiratorial smile. This is an opportunity everyone is dying for, and you deserve it. I'm confident it will only be a great start for your career. Expect a call from their office tomorrow morning. When Professor Williams walked away, Tommy was still standing in the same position, transfixed by what happened. Tommy, his mother appeared before him, worry in her eyes. Is everything all right? Mum, Tommy shrieked. I made it! Another 5 years whizzed by. Tommy stood in the foyer of a grand house, glancing down at his wristwatch as if waiting for something. There was a happy smile on his face as he waited and waited. Soon he heard the honk of a car and rushed through the front door to see a car parked in the elegant driveway of the house. As he approached the vehicle, the doors opened and his parents stepped out, along with Aunt Marge. What is this place? His mother asked, helping his father into his wheelchair. Hold on. Tommy paid the Uber driver and added a considerable tip before turning back to his family. Come with me, he said, taking over his father's wheelchair from Mom and helping him navigate his way into the house. The house was a sprawling, elegant residence in the upper-class neighborhood in town. It had lush gardens, 7 spacious rooms, a luxurious marble kitchen and a pool. As his family stepped into the foyer and strode to the living room, they gasped, their eyes wide with awe and curiosity. Tommy's eyes were misted with emotion. What is this place? His mother asked again. Tommy chuckled. Did you all kiss the trailer goodbye? He asked. Because this is our new home. What? They all shrieked. The women ran through the entire house while the men watched. His father took in the expansive living room and the bright and airy space. Tommy, this is beautiful. Dad, I have something special for you. What? The man's eyes widened with childlike excitement. The women were back, breathing heavily, their eyes bright with happiness. Tommy, Aunt Marge hugged him. This is amazing. I can't believe it, Mum said. You better do, Tommy laughed, leading his father to a covered object in the corner of the room. He pulled back the black covers to reveal a sleek, modern wheelchair resembling a compact vehicle. Everyone gasped in disbelief. Tommy, what is this? His father asked with a trembling voice. It's for you, Tommy answered softly. Let me show you how it works. Do you mind? His father shook his head. Show me. Tommy lifted his father from the old wheelchair and into the new one. He explained the mechanics to his father, including how to recline the backrests, elevate his legs, tilt the seats for better comfort, and everything. His family hummed in awe, and his father's eyes gleamed. Now this joystick is for movement, Tommy said. Move it forward. His father tentatively brought the joystick forward, and the chair lurched in that direction. They all squealed. Move it backward, Tommy said, and his father obeyed, gasping when the chair moved back. It didn't take him long to master the control, and he successfully navigated the entire house without stress. When he returned to where they were all standing, tears fell down his face. "I don't know what to say, Tommy," he cried. "This is more than a dream." "I don't want any of you to say anything," Tommy said, glancing at each of them. "You all have played a vital role in my life, and I will keep paying it back as long as I can. This is only the beginning. There is no me without you." They all came forward and pulled him into a grand embrace. He was about to join them in tears when his phone rang. He saw Professor Williams' name on the screen and pulled away, hurrying outside their new home to take his call. He knew why Professor Williams was calling. "Hello, sir." "Tommy, how are you?" "I'm fine, sir." "Mark Sinclair called me this morning. He said you submitted your resignation yesterday." "Yes, sir." Tommy nodded. "I plan to call you today." "Okay, can you share why you left?" Tommy took a deep breath. It had been 5 years working with Archibald Architecture, and although it had changed his life, it was finally time to move forward. He had bought an office building uptown where he planned to start his architectural firm. He explained all this to Professor Williams. When he was done, the professor sighed. "Tommy, remember what I told you at your graduation ceremony," he said. "I said this job at Archibald is a starting point in your career. It's time to scale, and I'm glad you've taken that bold step." Tommy sighed with relief. "Thank you, sir." "Let me know when your business is ready to take clients," he said. "I know a few people that would need your services." "Mr. Walters, we just received a proposal," Lisa said. "It's from Mr. Collin, who is interested in developing a 3-story shopping complex." Tommy hummed as he navigated through traffic on his way home. "Forward the email to me," he said into the phone. "I'm on my way home. I'll check it out tomorrow morning." "Okay, sir," his assistant answered. "Good night, sir." "Good night, Lisa." Tommy hung up and concentrated on the road before him. Soon he stopped at a traffic light and groaned. He was hungry and tired. He only wanted to get home and be with his family. As he waited for the light, his gaze scanned the road distractedly, biding his time until the seconds ticked past and the light turned green. His gaze rested on the beggar sitting by the curb on the street, holding a sign that said, "Spare some change for food." He was about to dig into his pocket for change when the beggar looked up, and Tommy's heart skipped. If there were a face he would never forget, it was that face. The light turned green, and instead of bolting forward on his way towards home, Tommy pulled the car onto the curb, directly in front of the beggar. He descended his vehicle and walked across the sleek car to the man who looked up at Tommy in awe. "You stopped," the man said. "Thank you. No one has stopped to give me some money since morning." Tommy took his glasses off and smiled down at the beggar, but the man didn't understand what was going on. He held out his hands for some change. "Please help me." Here Tommy was, at 27, CEO of a successful architectural business, driving the latest model of Mercedes. 18 years ago, this man was in the same position that Tommy was, bearing down on him and promising him that he would never be able to afford a Mercedes like his until he died. This man also said that even if Tommy's entire family were sold, they would never be able to amount the worth of his car. This man also called him a worthless piece of shit. Tommy badly wanted to toss some bills in the man's face and remind him of all those harsh words he'd said almost 2 decades ago. But as he looked at the man's withered face, he realized he didn't need to. He already won. Tommy now drove a Mercedes 18 years newer and more expensive than the model this man slapped and cursed him for. His entire family was now worth millions of dollars that this man would never be able to afford. Josh Walters now owned a poultry farm that Tommy helped him start 2 years ago, which was now very successful. Sarah Walters owned a mall uptown, also courtesy of Tommy, which raked in millions last year. Aunt Marge owned a private lesson for aspiring architects and was becoming a major name in the country, and even though he didn't see it then, Tommy saw it now that he was never a worthless piece of shit. He was poor, but not worthless. "Sir?" the beggar probed. Tommy looked down at his outstretched hands, and instead of dropping some cash in it as planned, he gave the man his business card. "So, there's no amount of money I can give you that will help you out of this situation," Tommy said, "but I'll give you a job." The beggar gasped and grabbed Tommy's legs. "Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Call me tomorrow," Tommy smiled, "and I'll see what I can do. All right?" "Yes." The man shuddered with gratitude. Tommy pulled away from him, slid into his car, and pulled away smiling. Nothing worked as hard as karma. Later that night after dinner, while he sat with his family in front of the TV, he said, "Do you all remember that man who slapped me for touching his car years ago?" Without hesitation, they all nodded. How could they forget? It was how Marge became a part of their family. "I saw him today." "What?" they shrieked. "Did he recognize you?" "No, he was begging on the streets. He begged me for money." "What did you do?" his mom asked. "I offered him a job." All three of them were silent for a moment, and Tommy saw the war in their eyes. He knew how hard it was to forgive, and it had taken him a minute to forgive the man while standing in front of him at the roadside. Finally, they said, "You did the right thing, Tommy. You are the winner here." Tommy smiled and leaned back against his chair. "That's right.